Hi, and welcome to another episode of Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie. It's the show that takes you into all things ooky, spooky, mysterious, and unexplained, and hopefully we try to get a little more comfortable with not having all of the answers. I'm the titular Sean.
And I'm the very titular Carrie.
And this week, what are we talking about, Carrie?
Well, this is part 2 of our deep dive into legends and lore of Connecticut.
That is right. And today we're going to take a look at some haunted locations or mysterious locations. Is that fair to say?
It's very fair to say.
Beautiful. Who's got the ball first?
I think you do, sir.
Okay. So let's talk about what is widely called the most haunted place in Connecticut. I've seen it called the most haunted place in the country.
That's a bold claim.
It is a bold claim. It is the tiny, abandoned village known as Dudleytown. Mm-hmm. Dudleytown is a small settlement in Cornwall, Connecticut, is really where it is, which is a good ways north of here.
Yeah, definitely further from the city and that whole area.
Yeah, so you hear lots of spooky stories. I think a lot of people's everyone has an older brother who knows a cousin who spent a night in a pickup truck near Dudleytown, and their flashlight batteries stopped working and all that kind of stuff. So let's look into Dudleytown, shall we? First of all, not a town. Was settled, but officially was part of Cornwall kind of from the beginning. But some folks first started settling there, including a guy named Gideon Dudley and his two brothers. They plopped down near Cornwall in 1747. And so the area, the hill they kind of plopped down on became known as Dudleytown.
So it was after their name.
It was after those guys, yeah. Today, the land is jealously guarded by the eerily named Dark Entry Forest Association.
Dark Entry?
Dark Entry.
Now, is the forest the Dark Entry Forest? What's the deal with that?
It is actually, I don't think anyone knows that because they just call it Dudleytown. It's technically Dark Entry Forest.
What's that name all about? Why is it so creepy for no reason?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I looked into it. There's actually a lot of, in other states and stuff, the Dark Entry was not an uncommon thing to name like a road, and the road as you come into Dudleytown is called Dark Entry Road, and the area is called Dark Entry Forest. It's because when they settled there, like there wasn't a lot of light that could get through because it's a very steep hill that had a bunch of trees on it.
So it's Connecticut's Dark Entry.
It's Connecticut's Dark Entry.
Lovely.
Yeah, they should have T-shirts.
Yeah, one in the pink, two in the Dark Entry.
So the Dark Entry Forest Association, whatever they get up to in their dark entries, are famously, I said they jealously guard the land. They'll call the cops on anyone who kind of sets foot on what is private property, admittedly. And yeah, so that's part of what gives the place kind of a creepy allure, is that there's this image of like these hermit people living there and not wanting outsiders nearby, and people say that there's no animals at all.
Is this their job, or are they volunteers? Is this more of a neighborhood watch? Or?
It's more of a neighborhood watch. They live there, is my understanding.
Interesting. Okay, but no one lives in Dudleytown.
They do. We'll get into the Dark Entry Forest Association a little bit more later. People do live there, and that's why they call the cops when people go ghost hunting in their backyards, essentially.
Right. Well, they definitely have a lot of land, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a 300-acre plot. We'll get into all of it. Okay. But right now, first, we need to talk about the Dudleytown curse. Oh. Because, well, there are some people living there. It's not a thriving community like it was for a time. And many say, because Dudleytown was plagued with... there are a lot of stories of misfortune that are around Dudleytown. I mentioned the Dudleys who came and moved here. Legend has it that they moved to the New World to escape a family curse.
Oh, but they moved like the whole family together?
Yeah. Yeah, well, no, their father left England to supposedly escape this curse. It all goes back to Edmund Dudley.
Okay.
Beheaded for treason after a cowardly attempt on the life of King Henry VIII.
And that's real?
That part is real, yes.
Oh, okay.
He tried to usurp the throne, and he was beheaded by King Henry VIII. Did Henry curse the family? Was Henry into laying curses? I don't...
I think he was into laying the ladies
into
in the
laying pipe,
chamber. But,
yeah.
I've never heard of a King Henry VIII curse before.
Well, this is a first because strange things happened to the descendants of Edmund Dudley. His grandson, Guilford Dudley, tried to marry into the throne, so he took a different route to power. But after some court intrigues and a few other royal deaths, power changed hands, and he and his wife were both executed. That was Guilford Dudley. Mm-hmm. His brother brought home a plague from France. He was a military officer, brought home a plague that killed thousands.
And they traced it back to this one guy?
Probably not, but the literature will tell you that he personally. And then their other brother, the third son, Robert, the Earl of Leicester, fled the curse to the New World. His three sons, eventually moved to Cornwall and found Dudleytown. Mm-hmm. A.B.L. Dudley.
Who?
A.B.L. Dudley.
A.B.L.
Yep, is one of these Dudley brothers.
Okay, one of the three.
Mm-hmm. No, one of the four, I'm sorry. Three of them moved away, left town.
Okay, all right. It's a lot of Dudleys.
Yeah, it's a lot of Dudleys. They left town. They didn't stay in Dudleytown too long, and they all lived long, full lives. Mm-hmm. A.B.L. Dudley stayed, and he died penniless and insane.
Why? What happened?
He sort of frittered away his fortune and eventually lost his mind and was a ward of the town before he died.
A ward of the town?
Uh-huh.
What is this, like Schitt's Creek?
I think it's more like Britney Spears, technically.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Later, a famous inhabitant of Dudleytown, Revolutionary General Herman Swift. This guy served under General George Washington. Big deal. Mm-hmm. He lived in Dudleytown. This is a true story. I'm not going to come back and debunk this later. His wife was standing out on their front porch in Dudleytown, and she was struck by lightning, killed dead. And he died completely insane. He also lost his mind, and he died alone.
Now, are we going to figure out why so many people in this one place go insane?
We'll get to everything. All will be revealed in time, okay. Caroline. One of the town's last residents was supposedly a John Patrick Brophy.
Oh, John Patrick, one of your people.
That is very true, and more on that later as well. Oh. Poor John Patrick's wife died of consumption, which was not an uncommon thing at the time. Nothing supernatural about that.
Nowadays, that's called tuberculosis, right?
That is very true. Mm-hmm. Died of TB. Shortly after the funeral, however, John Patrick Brophy's children both walked into the woods and were never seen again.
They walked into the dark entry woods?
They walked into the dark entry, and they never exited.
Yikes.
A short time later, his house burned down mysteriously, and a short time after that, legend has it, Brophy himself vanished into the forest, never to be seen again.
No body or anything.
I couldn't find any headlines about John Patrick. We'll get into John Patrick Brophy in a minute.
Okay.
But let's get into the modern age. In 1906, a Dr. William C. Clark came to Cornwall, saw Dudleytown, fell in love, bought a 300-acre plot of land there, and built a little vacation home. Sort of a little vacation resort. He was a guy with some money. Mm-hmm. Built a little vacation home for himself and his wife to enjoy on long weekends and summer trips. And they both loved it until one day, as the story goes, William C. Clark was called away to the city on an emergency, and he came back 36 hours later. His wife had been alone in the cabin. She had gone completely insane and spent the rest of her life in an asylum.
God. This is like a thing where you do a shot every time someone goes insane and you will be plastered in 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's wild. And some say she murmured stories of creatures coming out of the woods to attack her.
Now, could those be the little children that disappeared in the woods?
That's a very, very good question. But you can see why there's all this fascination around Dudleytown.
Sure.
Unfortunately, nothing is ever this fun in real life. And we have a guy to thank for our big debunk here. Dudley himself, Reverend Gary P. Dudley, wrote a book called The Legend of Dudleytown, Solving Legends Through Genealogical and Historical Research, which is a title I somehow said without falling asleep.
Well, he is a reverend.
And in this whole book, he finds, he does do his whole family tree. He's descended from the Dudleys of Dudleytown. And he finds no link between his family and the Dudleys of England.
Really?
Yeah. Just
Okay.
no connection at all. That part's totally
So the
made up.
Dudleys of England existed.
Yes, that's a real story.
And those things happened.
Yep.
And then, of course, the Dudleys of Dudleytown existed, but there is no genealogical link.
Correct.
I mean, it's early enough that they might have just come over and there's no link because people didn't keep their papers or whatever, you know?
That's true, but I think
Unless you do like a 23andMe type thing where you do a DNA test and compare it to like the English Dudley's DNA test.
No, that's true. And I guess we can't rule out any bastard children along the way who weren't accounted for. But this book, this guy does the whole family trees in both directions.
I see.
And shows how they kind of parallel pass each other. There's no connection. In the same book, he also goes into all the different stories of the suicides, the madness, the deaths, and largely finds those to be distortions or exaggerations or just untrue. And I've got a bunch of this stuff. This is amazing. I went on the Cornwall Historical Society's website, and they address all this stuff, obviously. And they revealed to me that all of these stories, John Patrick Brophy, the story about Dr. Clark and his wife, the story about A.B.L. Dudley going mad, the story about General Swift's wife getting struck by lightning and then him going crazy, all of those originated in a single book called History of Cornwall by an Edward C. Starr in 1926.
Okay.
And in the Cornwall Historical Society's words, for reasons that have yet to be explained, Starr wove together a fanciful and inaccurate 2-page account of Dudleytown residents over the centuries. No accounts of the supernatural in Dudleytown have been found prior to the publication of this book.
So it's like the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, but the same sort of thing where there wasn't actually like a Ichabod Crane or a Headless Horseman or whatever, but it's just set in this specific place.
And
he was using real names.
Sometimes he was.
Okay.
A.B.L. Dudley's a real guy. He did live in Dudleytown. His brothers did leave Dudleytown. A.B.L. did die insane and penniless, but at age 90... which sounds just more like somebody being senile.
Right, yeah.
So you've got that. Then Herman Swift, Revolutionary General, wife actually was struck by lightning.
Okay.
That's real. Apparently it was more common back in the day before we had lightning rods. That's real too.
She also happened to be standing next to Ben Franklin at the time, so it was just bad.
Yes, exactly.
Bad timing.
He's out flying his kite. You got to watch out for Ben. General Swift himself supposedly died insane and alone. That is true, but he died at age 81. So
still, it's a lot of insane old people.
Yeah, but like you've met old people.
They're not usually insane.
Right, but who knows?
A little daffy, maybe.
We haven't interviewed General Swift. Maybe he just lost a step and everyone's like, oh, and General Swift was crazy.
Yeah, well, people thought that ladies talking back to their husbands were crazy back in the day, so I guess...
Yeah, maybe he was for votes for women. John Patrick Brophy, the best story of the whole bunch.
Here's a result from the web.
Ooh.
Well, Google wants to chime in here. Let's see what we got. Obituary of John Patrick Brophy, age 77, born September 4th, 1941 in Houston, Texas. That's probably not our guy.
No.
That's okay, because John Patrick Brophy didn't exist.
They just made up this name and this person?
the best part is Starr's book doesn't even have the name John Patrick Brophy in it, but it does appear to be where that story began, because it has all of those things happen to, quote, an unnamed Irishman.
Okay.
But there's no supernatural element to his story. His sons just leave town because they were caught stealing, some Irish drunks out stealing stuff.
Well, that's stereotypical.
And then his house burned down because he was drunk.
And he set it on fire, or?
No, I don't know. He left a pipe around or something.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was John Patrick Brophy, and that's morphed into, that story's been retold over the years, and he's gotten a name, and Ghost Children.
And Ghost Children, yes.
Yep. And then Dr. Clark, real guy, really did buy that 300-acre plot of land. His descendants still live in Dudleytown today, though that's the Dark Entry Forest Association.
Okay.
And this apparently was just a total fabrication by Starr. That's not the way this guy's wife died, and Dr. Clark appears to have still been alive when that book was published.
Oh, that's really awkward.
What weird.
It's a weird thing to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so he just invented a story about how this guy's wife went crazy and I think killed herself.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, and again, apparently, I don't know. I don't know if Dr. Clark had stiffed him on a bill, or if he had given him a dirty look at some point. It's a small town, I guess. You have grudges.
I guess.
But that's Dudleytown. It's not, I don't think it's haunted, but it's a good story.
So the curse around Dudleytown was basically that, if you go there and you live there, you go insane and your wife probably dies.
Yes. Yeah. The curse. Appears to be about going insane.
Okay.
There were some deaths too. I skipped over a death. A.B.L. Dudley's buddy was killed when they were building his barn. Like a thing fell on him. But that seems like I didn't even include it because it seems like just a barn mishap.
Sure. Now, I've heard a lot of things about it being haunted.
Yeah.
Like a literal ghost town.
Right.
Where do you think those legends came from?
To be honest with you, the prevalence of ghost hunters in that area really kicked up. It was actually open to the public until the 90s.
Okay.
And then after Blair Witch came out, ghost hunters started rolling up to Dudleytown quite a bit, I guess, because that's when they put up all the no trespassing signs and started calling the police whenever cars rolled onto their land.
Now, are there abandoned buildings? Is there anything spooky about it? What kind of linked between this book by this guy who made up a bunch of stuff in the 20s and then Dudleytown in the 90s getting a lot of ghost hunters? What's that link? Why did people think that there were ghosts there?
It was just kind of somehow this one book, and again, I'm just saying this because the Cornwall Historical Society traced these things all back, and it's true. Before, there's no sources before 1926 that say any of these things happened. And of course, the Warrens got involved in the early 1970s. They paid a visit to Dudleytown, supposedly recorded a Halloween special there in the early 70s, although I can't find any reference to where this aired. Could have been
a
basic
special TV show?
Could have been public access. It could have been on ABC. I don't really know. Maybe they recorded it to video cassettes and handed them out at meetings.
Ghost meetings.
Anyway, Ed and Lorraine officially declared the land there demonically possessed.
Like all of the land.
Yeah, the land in Dudleytown. And they took photos there, and they said the photos showed orbs and swirls. So yeah, they say demonically possessed. Orbs and swirls is a ghost thing or a demon thing?
I mean, it sounds like an ice cream thing. I think it's a ghost thing. I think they call them
jimmies.
I think it's a ghost thing. If you're talking about orbs, swirls, I assume, is something like mist or energy that shows up. I mean, I'm sure demons can manifest as something like that. Maybe they're shadows or whatever, but I know orbs are definitely a spirit phenomena.
Okay. So if Ed and Lorraine say it's demonically possessed, but also they say there's some orbs, we got ghosts, we got demons, we got everything.
Everyone's hanging out.
Everyone's hanging out. And people get struck by lightning. We're having a great time.
So do you think the people in the 90s that were coming onto this land to ghost hunt were very influenced by what the Warrens said about the area?
I think they maybe started to dig into ghost stuff because they'd seen Blair Witch. Mm-hmm. And especially ghost stuff involving creepy woods. And then if they stumbled onto Dudleytown stuff, they probably would have stumbled onto Ed and Lorraine, who were probably saying a lot of the William Starr stories.
Well,
it's a game of telephone.
It is, yeah. This guy's crazy. This guy's crazy. His wife got struck by lightning. He went crazy.
John Patrick Brophy.
Yeah.
That's my favorite, is that a name got invented along the way.
A three-name name.
A three-name name.
It's very specific.
Super memorable name. That'll be the name of our firstborn child.
John Patrick Brophy McCabe.
Yes, absolutely.
4 names.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So your professional opinion is there's nothing really to this legend, but don't go there because they're kind of mean about trespassers.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's somebody lives there and they don't want you there, apparently. But also I think it's just so interesting that all of the Dudleytown ghost stories appear to be just this one guy. What was he doing?
Well, like I said before, I mean, Sleepy Hollow has this legend that people know is fake, but it's made it a destination, especially in the fall and Halloween time. So it only takes one guy's book to get to the masses, and then it just goes from there.
It worked great for Dudleytown. It's a booming tourist destination.
I don't think they want it to be.
No, they certainly don't. The place you're going to talk about is a place that I would love to, I hesitate to use the word break in. I would love to be inside of this building and take some pictures, but I know that we're adults and I'd be arrested.
Yep.
So tell us about Fairfield Hills.
All right. So this is Fairfield Hills State Hospital. I said I would get back to it while we were talking about the Melonheads and how they might have escaped from an asylum, or that was the story. So this is...
that was an asylum that had burned down, yeah?
Yeah, that's like one version of the story, yeah. So this is not that asylum, but it would have made sense to link it just in terms of location. It is the closest asylum anywhere around here in this area. It is in Newtown, Connecticut. So we've been here. We've driven up and through, and it's definitely a unique place, right?
Yeah, that's also where all of Newtown's, this is a little less spooky, but that's where all the town hall is and stuff. All their civic buildings are in some of the buildings of the hospital. Well,
yeah, and that's kind of part of the weirdness of it. The property still exists, so a lot of these buildings for the original asylum are still up. And about half of the buildings, from what I could see, were refurbished and turned into municipal and commercial offices. And the other half were just kind of left there. Like, not refurbished, not torn down. They're just there, like across the street from the town hall.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it makes them look all the more like dilapidated and, haunted, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, they are very dilapidated and spooky looking because, and like you said, especially because these buildings were just built. So they're like these shiny new town commercial buildings across from this like spooky old insane asylum kind of place. It's very strange, and I don't know why they didn't tear down the other ones. So there's this really strange dichotomy already. And it's there, half of it at least still. And it's an interesting look into the past while standing literally right in the present. So the original asylum, Fairfield Hills State Hospital, was opened in 1931 to help alleviate overcrowding at other state mental hospitals. So the
best of the best.
Well, the thing is, like with Dudleytown, if there's someone going crazy every week, basically back in the day, you're going to run out of space.
Well, yeah, and Newtown isn't that close to Cornwall, but maybe they had some overflow from Dudleytown.
Maybe. This is, you got to keep in mind, this is also a time period where you could be sent to an asylum for sassing your husband, or like being a woman and wearing pants, wanting rights.
Could you really be thrown into an asylum for wearing pants, or was that a bit?
I mean, it's an exaggeration, but I would say, especially in women's cases, if you had any sort of opinions that weren't of the norm for the time, which is very much being subservient to your husband and your family, it was definitely more likely that they would just get fed up with you and throw you into an institution. So, on that happy note, yeah, these asylums tended to fill up very quickly, which is why this one was built.
An overflow valve.
Yes. So it was typical of the time in its treatment of the mentally ill, which is very unfortunate. They forced treatments like frontal lobotomies, which is the classic kind of ice pick through the eye, tap, tap, tap on the brain sort of situation.
Mm-hmm. And you're destroying the frontal lobe.
Yes, a frontal lobotomy. Mm-hmm. So that supposedly is going to help you not be mentally ill. I think it mostly just made people not able to function anymore because they didn't know what they were doing, They did archaic electroshock therapy, which doesn't sound great either. There were many stories of suicide, quote unquote, mysterious deaths, abuse, and cruelty, which is very easy to believe when you're thinking of this whole situation of the time. So
this is a full-on movie asylum from the 60s. This is American Horror Story Season 2.
Well, I don't know. I mean, isn't there like aliens and like Nazis and stuff in that?
There's the lady who has flipper arms. There's Anne Frank is in the asylum.
To be fair, I think anyone with any sort of disability would be more likely to be sent to one of these places. I don't think it was any like House on Haunted Hill or like American Horror Story where, there's just people running through the halls and there's a lot of spooky things happening. It was just a bad place to be. It was a bad place to be.
I'm talking more about the leather straps, the ice baths, the
that
electrodes.
Sort of thing. Yeah, I think that was definitely common then. Very unfortunately for these people who probably weren't that mentally ill by today's standards. Maybe you had depression or ADHD or anything like that. If you were abnormal, you were probably going to be sent away.
A lot of blue-green camera color tints, too.
Yes, for sure. A lot of stark imagery.
Mm-hmm.
So the hospital was closed by Connecticut, the state, in 1995, which is surprisingly recent. But since then, it was used as...
I was 7.
Yeah, like we were both alive, and this place was still running, which is kind of crazy. It's been used as a setting in films. So one of those was the movie Sleepers with Kevin Bacon. So it is 1 degree away from Kevin Bacon. And it is also known for being the setting of an episode of the old MTV show Fear. Have you ever seen that?
No.
It's a short-lived reality supernatural TV competition show sort of thing. Something like Scariest Places on Earth was another one that's very similar. So they spent the night there in September 2000. And you can still find this episode, which is number 2 of the show, on YouTube in fabulous, ripped from a VHS quality.
Can I ask number 2 out of what?
It is a short-lived show, so I think it was just one short season.
Might be about a 1/6 of the series here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And on YouTube, you could also find plenty of unauthorized tours of the place. Now, if you're dying to go through these buildings, this is probably your best bet, because while we don't condone going onto private property and possibly getting arrested, at least these things already exist, so you can watch the videos on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, don't go get arrested.
No, definitely not. Especially since this would be a very stupid place to trespass onto, because you have town hall and town buildings literally right there. Mm-hmm. So that was like the last thing that was really filmed there of note. It was supposed to be used as a location once more in a film adaptation of The Madman's Tale around 2007 or so. But
is that the one where the women all wear the hoods?
That's The Handmaid's Tale.
Ah. Is it as searingly relevant?
Well, there's a few madmen in the world today, I think. So The Madman's Tale is a novel written by John Katzenbach, released in 2004. And you can even find this on the Wikipedia page for that book. The adaptation was supposed to be filmed between 2007 and 2008 at Fairfield Hills. But the lead actor had some personal issues, so production was stopped before they even began.
Was he living in Dudleytown?
Yes, he had just gone mad from living in Dudleytown.
And then he stayed at Fairfield Hills, and then he became a melonhead. It all comes together.
But yeah, so that never filmed there. So that was kind of the last thing that had the opportunity to film there, probably because it was a bigger film. Thanks to the feature on fear in the early 2000s, it became the local hotspot for teenagers to trespass on.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So much so that in 2014, the Fairfield Hills Authority voted against letting the show Ghost Hunters film in some of the remaining buildings. So I think going forward, you're not going to get a Ghost Adventures or a Ghost Hunters crawling through these old abandoned buildings.
No Bagans.
No Bagans. I mean, I think especially not. If they're not letting the Ghost Hunters there, I don't think they're letting anyone else.
Certainly not the human can of Red Bull that is Zach Bagans.
Yes.
Are you going to bash my skull in? Because I'm on strike.
So speaking of ghost hunting, because of its very clearly and definitely correct creepy look and the use already in horror-related media, the asylum has gained a reputation for being haunted.
No.
Since it's closed. Yes, I know. An old, dilapidated asylum just sitting there. So many ghosts. So there's no specific legends around the ghosts that I can find. No, like, we saw Dr. Thompson in the lobotomy room window, but it's been closed for 20 years. No, there's none of that.
But an asylum is just the kind of setting that you almost go, well, if there are ghosts.
Right. Like, talk about a location being demonically possessed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even, I personally believe that energy can inhabit a place. Now, we certainly differ on that, but I believe energy can't be destroyed, and I think it can leave an imprint on a location if it's strong enough. And when you come to a place like Fairfield Hills or any sort of other mental institution that is from back in the day, so many terrible things were happening in these places and done to these patients. So many of these people weren't actually sick in any way. It was just a kind of torture because their families wanted to get rid of them. I mean, it's a very, very dark place, and it feels oppressive just looking at it. And yeah, a lot of that is because it's creepy looking. But you also think about all of the pain and horror that happened there without ghosts. So I'm not surprised that people think it's haunted, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of psychic residue, I think would be the term.
Yeah, and I believe in that. So yeah, if that's happening, then that makes sense to me. There are plenty of claims of sounds and like people seeing things in the windows and stuff like that. From a rather adorably titled article in a Halloween Time 2017 issue of the Connecticut Post.
Can't wait.
Which the title is, "Where Will the Ghosts Go When Fairfield Hills is Torn Down?"
Oh,
I know. It's like, aw, where are the ghosts going to go?
Poor little guys.
Yeah, it's really sad. In this article, several ghost hunting groups said that they expect the hauntings to remain, and even warned that, quote, any location like that has had a traumatic past is going to leave imprints of negative energy. So since then, a few years ago, when that article came out, further demolition or renovations have made way for a proposed civic and cultural center.
Are they kicking up ghosts? Are these demos kicking up ghosts, Carrie?
I haven't heard anything on that front yet. But of course, if you're working there in the town hall or whatever, are you really going to be like telling the Connecticut Post, hey, I saw this ghost? You already probably get a lot of people trespassing. So as of 2018, some of the largest and spookiest buildings still remain behind chain link fencing and broken glass. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it's we haven't been up there in a bit. I'm sure nothing's happened on that front in a while because there's not been a lot of construction going on.
What does that virtual tour look like? On the inside, are there still file cabinets in there?
They've kind of cleaned up the worst objects. We went to school. I went to school on Long Island near Kings Park Asylum, and I knew some people that had been there in the 90s before the cleanup. And there were still syringes around, and not like, people doing drugs in there, but like actual medical syringes that looked very old. They found a couple of straitjackets, things like that. Places that people would be strapped down for electroshock. Those kind of things were still there in the 90s in Kings Park. And then eventually they were cleaned out because people kept on trespassing. Again, I don't know why these buildings weren't just demolished. You're sending people in there to clean out the syringes and straitjackets. Like, why are you leaving these buildings there? It's very interesting.
It is strange that nothing else has gone up there.
But things have gone up there. A couple of buildings, sure, were torn down. But if you're already tearing down the other ones, like, why leave the giant ones behind a fence just being spooky across the street?
Well, I think you're assuming that tearing a building down is free.
But the same thing happened with Kings Park. So my point was that, eventually these places were starting to get cleaned out.
Shakespeare Theater. Mm-hmm. Sat there till it burned down.
But that's more of like a historical thing. And also the stuff around it wasn't torn down.
Remington Arms Plant.
Well, again, why? No, it still doesn't make sense to me because the Remington plant is not in a good area. It's right by the highway.
It's full of lead and asbestos.
Exactly. And if these places are full of lead and asbestos, which is probably true, they're not safe to be in.
Is this a town council meeting?
I feel very confused and yet passionate about this.
I would think you'd be in favor of more spooky in the world.
No, I am. I just want to know why. I don't know the answer.
Give me the ghost stories.
Okay. Well, there's no real set in stone ghost stories. These buildings just still exist. People see things in windows. They hear weird sounds. But there's nothing that is like, oh, this is the legend they always tell about this place. So people work on this campus still. Locals are encouraged to walk the trails and bring their dogs there. I guess you can enjoy the scenery.
I do enjoy the scenery. I think it's very cool.
Again, I do, but I don't know if like some young couple with their baby is going to be like, oh, look, it's the dilapidated asylum.
No, it looks like a place Batman would fight a bunch of thugs in thematic costumes.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. So there are those eerie vibes you get on the campus, and there's like this weird doubling sensation when you're standing in the street and you see these brand spanking new buildings on one side and a rundown mental hospital on the other. Mm-hmm. The only real weird story that I personally have about it comes from probably my own faulty memory. I remember as recently as my college days, there was this awesome website that painstakingly recounted the history of Fairfield Hills. And we were filming a movie that took place in a mental institution. So I was, looking at this area because I already knew the place. So now, unfortunately, there is a porn ad site camped on the domain, which was super, super fun to open at work. But the website is still available on the Wayback Machine. I don't know why I remember it this way. Maybe I'm just making it spookier in my own mind.
Okay.
But I recall either at this site or at another site about this subject, the updates stopped abruptly, and it was rumored that the webmaster had died mysteriously.
Okay.
Like, I don't think I made that up.
But you can't find evidence of it?
I thought that maybe it was one of those things where someone else had updated it again and said, like, sorry, Webmaster Dave is dead or whatever. But I couldn't find, like, when it stopped. You know, when it stopped being about a mental institution, started being a porn site.
Right.
So.
Right. Very interesting. I mean, maybe that's Webmaster Dave.
The porn site?
Yeah. Maybe he is just letting it all hang out now.
Oh, he's letting a lot of things hang out and letting other people let things hang out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But on the Wayback Machine, like, this site really dove into the history. So it was really unfortunate that happened to it. So, you know, in my mind, I went back to the story like, oh, there was this webmaster who was like always visiting Fairfield Hills and writing about it. And then he went mad and he died mysteriously. But I couldn't find that. So
that almost makes it creepier.
It makes it creepier, which is really why I wanted to find it, but I couldn't find that.
It's like Candle Cove.
Yes, that famous creepypasta. But in any case, the site is defunct as a historical site, not as a porn site. So even if the buildings aren't.
So that was Fairfield Hills Asylum.
Yep, that's it.
That's what you got.
That is all I have. It is a spooky place. I have spooky memories around it, but I don't know if they're real. And there's not a lot of quote unquote proof about the hauntings and things like that. Not for lack of trying on the case of the ghost hunters, but they just aren't interested anymore. So again, if you don't want to encourage it, why are those buildings there?
Can we get a petition going to the city of Newtown, to the town of Newtown, to either knock those things down or let Zach Bagans get up in them?
I wouldn't give them an ultimatum, especially since I genuinely don't want them to be knocked down, but I want to know more.
Why don't we let Zach Bagans knock them down?
With just the power of his intensity?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
He'll just yell at ghosts so loud that the walls fall down.
We're your workers. All three of us are on strike. What are you going to do about it?
Those were haunted places. We'll be back with a few haunted people of Connecticut when we return.
Or haunting people.
Or haunting people?
Well, the Leatherman isn't a haunted person.
We'll be back with more haunting or haunted people when we come back with more haunted or haunting people. This show is called Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie. Goodbye. And we're back with some haunting or haunted people of Connecticut. Some local legends. And I'm going to start us off with a story that sounds a lot scarier than it is at first blush. I'm going to tell you about the Connecticut Leatherman.
Oh, is this like a Texas chainsaw, like Connecticut Chainsaw Massacre?
It sounds like it would be Connecticut's version of Leatherface.
Right.
Nothing quite as exotic as that, but it is an interesting story and definitely a local legend. So we're going to cover it. Yeah, this is more a haunted man than a haunting man. He's not a haunt. He's not a ghost.
Is a real person.
Yes, he was a real person, the Leatherman. He was a...
Didn't it say that on his birth certificate? Like, leather space man?
Well, unfortunately, Caroline will never know.
Oh, strange.
Because this gentleman is known only as the Leatherman. In fact... There is a cemetery in Ossining, New York.
Okay.
With the final resting place of this gentleman, and the stone there only says the Leatherman.
So he was from Connecticut, But he was like, you know what? I'm going to be buried in New York.
He probably wasn't from Connecticut.
Oh.
So, this was a man, a homeless gentleman, a tramp in the parlance of the times.
Of the time, not of this time, though.
A tramp or hobo who would walk the... he did a 365-mile route of western Connecticut and eastern New York. Mm-hmm. He would do this 365-mile circuit every 34 days.
Specifically 34.
34 days.
Okay.
And so if you saw the Leatherman, you knew in 34 days you would see him again, and he was never late.
That's so weird.
It is wild. And he was
such a specifically non-specific time. It's not a month.
Nope.
It's not a month and a week.
Nope.
It's 34 days.
That's right. And people would give him money. He would usually refuse. He would take a little bit and go, just kind of wander away, grunt. He would point at his mouth and grunt, and people would give him food. He always ate outside, never agreed to go indoors anywhere. He was called the Leatherman because he always dressed in the same clothes. This was a baggy leather suit.
Oh, God, that doesn't sound comfortable.
No, it definitely doesn't. He had sewn it himself out of discarded boot tops.
Oh, that's a lot of boots.
It's a lot
to make a whole suit?
It's a lot of boots, and think about how hot and heavy it would be.
Yeah, well, it's been like 90 degrees recently just around here, and we're not even in the South.
That is correct. Yeah, it was a 60-pound suit of shingled leather patches that he stitched himself by hand. So that's what he wore. Didn't bathe regularly, so you have to imagine he smelled great.
Oof. Could he speak, or...?
He would only grunt. He mostly spoke in pantomime and grunts, but he would mumble a few words in broken English. And people said his accent sounded French.
Oh, that's very interesting.
It is. We're going to get into all kinds of theories about the Leatherman. But so this wasn't a scary figure, right? He would come into town. People would know he was coming. Mm-hmm. And he was kind of a local mascot. All the children would be waiting in town for... They'd come run. The Leatherman, the Leatherman. They would bring him little scraps of food and stuff. Kids would actually often... tease the Leatherman, unfortunately. But they thought it was a fun time when he was around. People would often try to offer him alcohol. He liked, brandy, and he liked beer. Actually, it says here, there's a receipt from a shopkeep from that time, and the Leatherman came in with some money someone had given him and handed the guy his order written on a note. And so this is the Leatherman's lunch.
Okay.
Can of sardines.
Okay.
Loaf of bread.
Okay.
Pound of crackers.
Ooh. Okay.
A quarter of a pie.
An apple pie.
You know, if you've ever seen a cartoon, you know a hobo loves a pie. Whether it's on a windowsill.
Only if he has a little stick with a hanky on it that he could carry it in.
Of course, that's true. And our friend the Leatherman didn't, unfortunately. 2 quarts of coffee, a gill of brandy, and a bottle of beer. Just one.
God. Sounds like he would just be having a lot of intestinal issues.
Yeah, it's not the diet of a man who... it's not the diet you would want for a man who doesn't probably ever get to use a toilet.
Yeah, and just is walking all the time, sweating.
Yeah.
Just sweating out coffee and brandy, not drinking water.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So people got the idea that this guy was French or maybe French Canadian, but they couldn't get him to, they would ask him in French or in English. He wouldn't want to talk to anyone. Didn't want to talk about his past. And sometimes people would try to get him drunk to try to get him to open up. But after that happened, the Leatherman would avoid those people. If you started prying too much, he wasn't interested. He didn't want to be. His trek included New Haven at one time. He would go all the way up to New Haven until a gang of street toughs grabbed him in New Haven and poured liquor down his throat to get him drunk, and trying to figure out where he was from.
It's like the shittiest version of Grease ever.
Yeah, very much so.
I'm gonna get you drunk or else I'll punch you.
A similar thing did happen to my cousin Pat. When we were in
you?
No, we were in Galway, Ireland, and 2 guys. Pat's a short. My whole family's short, but 2 Irishmen ran in to a bar, like from the street, grabbed him by both arms, and left with him. And we
And
followed.
were you concerned?
Yeah, sure. No, I wasn't. But his mother, I think, followed them down the street, and these guys
Where are you going with my Patrick?
That's right. And these guys are dumping a shot of whiskey forcefully into his mouth in another bar down the street.
Was he of legal age? I mean, in America.
In Ireland, yeah, he was over 12.
But he was still too young to drink here.
Oh, probably.
So maybe they were trying to do a thing of like, let's give you your first shot or whatever.
No, it wasn't his first of the night or of his life. Anyway.
Well, it's just a strange thing to do to someone. I understand it more in Ireland than I do in New Haven.
Yeah, they knew we were Americans and they were trying to show us the crack.
Yeah, show us the crack.
Yeah, it's the Irish word for fun. So they say, we're looking for some good crack. That's what they say all the time. That's a bad Irish brogue.
But it's also just a bad thing to say in America, too.
Yeah,
show me the crack.
I met an Irish guy who said that he was asked in customs once on the way into the U.S. What he was there for, and he said, I'm here for some good crack.
Oh, yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, it's CRAIC, I think.
Yeah, that makes more sense. So he used to go to New Haven.
Didn't do it after they dumped the liquor down his throat.
But was he still doing the same 34 days? He just figured out what would be that same amount.
Yeah, he must have just made it up somewhere else.
Crazy.
And it was so to the day that people would mark their calendars for the next time he was going to come back. And they would like skip church picnics and stuff if, they wanted to be there for the Leatherman when he got there because, we're his meal for today.
Right.
So it's kind of nice.
That is kind of nice, yeah.
Things weren't always great for the Leatherman. This also, he wasn't alone. There were other people who would wander, again, tramps and hobos and bums, kind of.
Synonyms everywhere. I'm sure there were, but probably not to the same, like, set, vigorous schedule that he was.
No, and... But there were enough that there was a tramp law passed in the state in 1879. Mm-hmm. But this was largely ignored. That was a law where if you were a vagrant, you could be thrown. If you were sleeping outside, you'd be thrown in jail.
Okay.
But it was universally ignored for the Leatherman, this law, and at least 10 towns in New York and Connecticut made specific exceptions. Like the tramp law doesn't apply to the Leatherman in this town.
That's genuinely touching.
It's beautiful. He had caves and hideouts that he would sleep in as well. Mm-hmm. And the Leatherman caves, you can still find them. And there's still some of them you can see like where he marked stones or whatever to remind himself where to come back.
That's crazy. I would love to see that.
Yeah, well we can go find them. There's a whole website. You know what? We'll post a link on our website. Mm-hmm. You can find these Leatherman caves online and go see them. That's something you won't get arrested for, and it's kind of cool.
Only if you sleep in the cave, and then you'll be a vagrant and you will get arrested.
Right. At the time, kids found this out. People knew at the time that he would sleep in caves because kids had followed him. Leatherman, had followed him into the woods,
chanting.
And found
apparently
the cave.
Interesting.
Yeah. So in 1877, the newspapers reported the Leatherman's lips were sore and cracked and that he was refusing aid. These were the kinds of stories would appear in the newspaper because everybody knew this kind of local character.
Different time.
Yeah. In 88, there was a great blizzard. If you look at any news from the winter of 88.
1888.
Yes, 1888. That blizzard is referenced. It was a huge, huge disaster of the time. The Leatherman survived it in a makeshift hut he'd made for himself in Southington, and he only lost 4 days off his route.
Wow. So he wasn't even in like someone's barn or anything like that. Did he ever stay at people's houses? Or did he ever get offered that? Or was he always like, I'm going to go to the cave, bye?
He usually wouldn't even eat indoors. I have an account here of a later in his life, an example of him inside, but I think it's one of the only accounts of that happening. He was a smoker. He had a pipe, a little handmade tin pipe, presumably several that he would make. You know, he'd make pipes out of tin, and then he would smoke just cigar stubs, discarded cigar stubs that he found.
Okay.
The Leatherman. He also carried a handmade knife and a hatchet, and he had a French language prayer book on him when he died.
So it probably is a case of where he came from French Canada down to New York.
Well, or France. Or France. He also wore a religious medal of some kind, so people speculated that he was a Roman Catholic.
But they never got close enough to see.
Well, no, it's just that if and he would refuse meat on Fridays. So,
okay.
He never said he was Catholic because he didn't say anything, but
the clues add up.
The clues add up. Would you like to hear the possible origin stories?
Absolutely.
I could not find where these origin stories originated, but these are the two possible origins for the Leatherman. These are the two legends.
Okay.
Some say he was the son of a carpenter from France. Named James Bourglet, who fell in love with the daughter of a wealthy leather merchant by the name of Laurent. Bourglet invested heavily in Persian leather to try to, make a fortune, impress this girl, and win her heart.
This is the Leatherman or his father?
The Leatherman.
Okay.
Just before a crash in the market.
In the leather market?
In the Persian leather market, yeah. He was totally ruined. The wedding was canceled, and he was ultimately imprisoned in a Paris monastery for inability to pay his debts. But he escaped to self-imposed penance in the United States, wearing all the unsold leather he couldn't get rid of.
The Persian leather market.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was a thing. Also, are there cows like better somehow?
Why would it be a thing? They have cows in France.
Yeah. And there's a market that fell out somehow. How does that happen?
They talk about Corinthian leather, right? But that's, I think, more of isn't it a process or the way it feels or something?
So. That's so weird.
So yeah, I'd never heard of that before, Persian leather, but I think...
And the market dropped out. Yeah. Somehow, they stopped needing that leather. Maybe they figured out, we have cows here, so we're fine. We don't need the Persian cows.
The demand was gone after that.
That's so bizarre.
Very strange, which, this feels a lot to me like somebody just kind of bending over backwards to explain the leather coat.
Well, it also kind of feels like someone telling a lie, but they add so many details that it makes it more suspicious when they think it makes it less.
The fact I was shocked that there's a name attached to the wealthy merchant because it makes it feel like a thing you could look up.
John Patrick,
John Patrick
it's a specific. It's a specific name.
Mm-hmm.
It's 3 names. This guy's got a French name. There's Persian leather.
I think I just got his name wrong twice, by the way. It's Jules Bourglet.
Maybe his dad was James.
Maybe.
Okay. Jules.
Jules Bourglet. Cool. Or, other option, he was an escaped French-Canadian convict who had murdered his wife and her lover. I don't know where the basis for that is. I don't know who said it. I don't know why they said it, but that's another thing people said.
I like the French-Canadian angle, but I think this is probably a person that was brought up in the wilderness and then just kept on being in the wilderness, maybe had some sort of mental illness or obsessive compulsive sort of thing where he had to follow the same schedule and he had to be outside.
The schedule is interesting.
Yeah, that is really strange.
Early 1888, before that blizzard, he had been arrested in Middletown by the Connecticut Humane Society, which I think is normally more interested in arresting dogs.
Yeah, stray pets.
Yeah. So the Humane Society, I assume, caught him in a big net. And they brought him in, and they found that he was... they wanted to get him off the street and save his life, essentially. But they found he was basically sane, and he had a little bit of money on him. So they let him go.
Okay.
He didn't want to stay with them. He didn't want to be helped. So,
you can't force an adult man who's of sound mind to do anything legally.
Absolutely
especially
not.
then. So.
But he was pretty sick at that time, and they could tell, and that's part of why they tried to convince him to stay.
Could they tell anything besides the crack lips
Well,
and stuff?
Here's an account. This isn't from the Humane Society, but it's from around this time, and this is a family he stayed with. He was brought to the fire by the family. He was a pitiable object, cold and wet, half of his lower lip on the left side eaten away. He was given plenty of hot coffee and milk, cake and pie. He could only eat by crumbling it into the coffee, of which he drank 6 large bowls of coffee. When eating, he had a piece of leather which he put over his sore lip to keep food from it. He seemed grateful and furtively watched every move as if afraid of something. He was offered tobacco, pipe, and matches, all of which he declined with a shake of the head. He prefers the taste of tin, apparently. When he was warm and had eaten enough, he got up to go. He was told to sit and warm himself as long as he liked. He simply pointed up the road, and with an expressive gesture, indicated he must go. The Leatherman died of cancer less than a year later.
Oh.
His body was found in one of his caves, March 24th, 1889, in Mount Pleasant, New York. He was found by a guy who was apparently trying to impress a date. Hey, you know what? There's one of the Leatherman caves around here. Come on. I've seen him stay there. Come on.
So you're either going to run into nothing, you're going to run into a homeless man, or you're going to find a corpse, which they did.
Yep.
Sounds like a great date.
Great date. So they found a corpse. He was buried in Sparta Cemetery in Ossining, New York. And his original tombstone said this: "Final resting place of Jules Bourglet of Lyon, France, the Leatherman, who regularly walked a 365-mile route through Westchester and Connecticut from the Connecticut River to the Hudson, living in caves in the years 1858 to 1889.
So that name was on his original stone.
Yes.
That's for sure. That's not part of that legend.
No, that is what the stone said.
That's interesting.
But they were just guessing. That was
so
the most.
That story was already out there.
It was the most prominent legend.
He's the Persian leather guy.
Right.
Interesting. I wonder where that even came from.
In 2011, his grave was moved further away from Route 9. And this was after, unfortunately, when they moved the grave, they dug him up, and they found that none of the remains were left. Nearby traffic, and a road grading project in the intervening years had taken everything.
All of his bones and stuff?
A few coffin nails and a little bit of the soil from the plot were moved to a new grave, and a new marker was put down that simply reads, "The Leatherman."
So the land was still there that he was on. What happened to his bones?
Well, it said a road grading project, so I feel like half of his grave was just
God.
taken.
How close was it to the root? He couldn't move it over a foot? That's
and
bizarre.
if you're going to move the guy, move him before you grade the road.
Exactly. There's a stone there. And why did they change the stone?
Because his name was... I think putting the name Jules Bourglet, if that wasn't his name, it's a little disrespectful.
Well,
and they were
guess.
probably trying to... I like that now it just says the Leatherman. That's how the town knew him.
Yeah, it's just...
That's how the whole area
bizarre. It's bizarre to let that happen and then be like, oh shit, let's move him now.
I know.
Let's move these nails that aren't him.
3 coffin nails and some dirt. That's what they put in a box.
It's a sweet metal album.
Coming soon.
Well, it's a sad ending, but surprisingly, it seems like people in New York and Connecticut were genuinely, for the most part, surprisingly kind to this person.
Yeah, and unsurprisingly, there's always going to be some dicks who pour some whiskey down your throat.
Yeah, always, no matter where you go. All right, well, that's the Leatherman.
That's the Leatherman. And who's our other haunted individual?
It was more of a haunting individual, actually. This short little story is going to be my final contribution today. It is about the Headdless Horseman of Canton.
Love it.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
This is not the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow.
No, Canton, Connecticut. So, Sean.
Yes, Caroline.
You know for a fact that I am a slut for a mysterious horseman with a pumpkin for a head. You just know this.
You love it.
I love it. So Washington Irving's story that we mentioned earlier, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, is longer and more dense than you probably remember. It's not just like, oh, there's Ichabod. He's on a bridge. There's a horseman. Where's Ichabod? There's a lot to it.
I think when people think of it, what they're thinking of is actually the Disney cartoon.
Probably. Definitely. Is that the one with the toad as well? It's probably not a toad involved. Ichabod and Mr. Toad.
It was sold as a, or it was put in theaters, I think, as a double feature.
Oh, I see.
A Mr. Toad thing and then Ichabod, because it wasn't a full-length film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's definitely more to it. That's kind of a short part of that story, but it's been a favorite of mine since I was a kid. I've always loved that imagery. It's so spooky, and I grew up pretty close to the Tarrytown area where it took place. So it was always kind of cool to be like, ooh, this spooky legend that is so famous is nearby. And, you could drive down that area and you see the signs for Sleepy Hollow, and you just, as a kid, you associate it with that story.
Mm-hmm. Well, the town still associates itself with that story.
Of course,
it's
and why wouldn't you?
Pretty nice tourist industry.
Yeah. But less known is the legend of Connecticut's own torso-tastic equestrian. I just had to get that in there. So according to our favorite website, Damned Connecticut, the earliest account of the story that can be found originates in the Connecticut Quarterly from late summer 1895 in an article about Canton, Connecticut by the Honorable William Edgar Simmons.
So this does post-date the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow.
I believe so, and it does post-date the Leatherman as well. Just interesting tidbit.
Yeah.
But yeah, late 1800s is the earliest recounting of this story. So the Honorable Edgar Simmons wrote, quote, "During the Revolution, a French paymaster left Hartford for Saratoga with his stout saddlebags filled with gold for the payment of French officers in the American army. He was traced to this tavern for a night's rest and no further. The innkeeper always avowed that lied departed safe and sound." I think he typoed there. The innkeeper always avowed that he departed safe and sound, but it was probably heavenward, for no evidence of lateral travel was ever found. Nice one, by the way. Nice one.
So that's in the innkeeper's words?
No, this is this is Simmons just being fancy with it. So basically, there's no evidence that he ever left, even though the innkeeper said he did. Mm-hmm. A discovery made after the tavern burned down a few years ago tends toward a belief in his murder. This incident endowed the highway with the legend of a ghastly phantom, a headless horseman to be met at night in a neighboring pass where the trees shadow the road so completely that no sunlight penetrates even at midday. So another dark entry.
Yeah. We love a dark entry.
Love it. In David E. Phillips' book, Legendary Connecticut, it's stated that the discovery made at the burned tavern was, quote, "the bleach bones of a human skeleton complete, except for the skull." Basically, the screaming skull.
That's pretty dope. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in another book of Connecticut Curiosities, which is Connecticut Ghost Stories and Legends, discloses a more detailed account by Canton historian Dr. Lawrence S. Carleton. So in this version, which is set one night around the time of the Civil War, a traveler making his way along a deserted Canton highway encounters a horseman standing in the shadows.
Wait, so this happened either in 1776 or 1865?
Listen, it was a war. We're not sure which war, but it was a war, is basically it.
It might have been in Nam.
Yeah, it was definitely Nam. So the traveler asks the horseman if he knows how to get to the Hosford Inn, and the horseman just silently points, then gets on his horse and rides away to the west. So he's like, deuces, man, I'm out. Like, here's the inn. Peace. So it's only after the horseman leaves does the traveler realize that the person he just met was headless.
A ghost. Oh. Wait, what?
I don't know how you miss that.
Does he tip his cap as he rides away, but his head comes with it?
I genuinely don't know how you miss that someone's missing a head. Like maybe he had a
Read that passage again. It is only.
Okay. It is only after the horseman leaves that the traveler realizes that the person he just met.
Yep.
Sean, this is serious.
The person he just met.
Was headless. He ain't got no head. So like again, like he's missing his whole ass skull. How do you not? And then he's riding away, and then you're like, wait. Oh, like what? I don't know, but that's the story.
No, you know what? I just noticed that guy didn't look me in the eye once. Oh,
there were no eyes. There was no head. I don't know.
Wait, was that a pumpkin? Oh!
Since the story began circulating, people have claimed to see a horseman riding west away from the tavern. So if you're at the tavern, west is towards Saratoga, New York. But I highly doubt like people can tell that or have knowledge of which direction Saratoga is from the tavern.
I don't think people usually know which direction west is, unless
it's certainly not anymore, but that's part of the story. If someone tells me to go west to the nearest Dunkin' Donuts, my eyes will just immediately glaze over. The flowy caped horseman is always on a dark phantom stallion with fiery eyes.
This guy knows how to dress.
Well, he's a ghost man.
Horseman.
Yes, he's on a ghost horse. So the horse is dead, but it has its head. Like I feel like that would be even more obvious if it was a headless horse.
The horse is dead and loving it.
It's a headless horse, man. Yeah.
It's my favorite Jay-Z lyric. I'm a headless horseman. I'm a headless horse, man.
Yes. So it's got fiery eyes. He's always on this horse. Like, who murdered the horse is my main question.
Oh, because...
like, if this guy is a ghost, like, why do you have to kill the horse? Like, that would be someone killing us and then being like, oh, let's shoot the dog too. Like, that's messed up.
Well, maybe he was, it's not great for the horse, but maybe he was being nice to his murder victim, because like an Egyptian pharaoh would want to be buried with a bunch of horses.
This guy was barely even buried with his head. Like,
this guy's lucky he's got a cranium in here.
You're gonna bury a whole horse with him? Insane. That's the real crime, I think.
Wait, when that headless corpse was found, there wasn't a horse in there.
It was a skeleton, and no, I don't believe there was a horse. You know, maybe he
I got a lot of questions about this horse.
I got a lot of questions about this whole thing, Sean. A Hosford-associated public house did exist in the area in the late 1700s, so that could be the Hosford Inn that is mentioned.
Yeah.
But nowadays, at the purported location, which is around the Canton junction of routes 44 and 202, all that remains there is a fish restaurant and a 1750s era cemetery.
Ooh, fish.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe you'll see the horseman there one night if you decide to like take a stroll through the cemetery after a delicious dinner of shrimp scampi and calamari Caesar salad, which are on the menu. So
thank you for looking into that.
I think menus are a very important piece to any puzzle, and I like to bring that to the table.
I think that's why we get along so well, is our passion for menus.
Yes, and what's on them. So yeah, that's kind of it. I mean,
when were these sightings happening? You said people have claimed to see him riding west. Was that in the 1800s?
Over time.
It's not like
time.
This isn't like you saw internet comments like I saw a guy on a horse.
I didn't see any internet comments, but these sightings were mentioned in both Legendary Connecticut and Connecticut Ghost Stories and Legends. So,
well,
and the latter did enclose an account by Canton historian Lawrence S. Carlton. So, who knows? But they can't really even get the war set. So I don't know.
We don't know which war it was.
But it's interesting that you can kind of trace it to this this route, this junction, and there is like a Hosford public house, or owned by someone named Hosford.
It really feels like someone just trying to rip off the Ichabod Crane story, though. My boy
It does
Icky.
kind of your boy Icky, little Icky.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like that. It also feels like maybe there was some sort of inn or whatever around there, and they were telling spooky stories one night at the bar. I don't know.
Let me ask you, in the Sleepy Hollow story, what's the backstory on that Headless Horseman? Is it the one from the movie Sleepy Hollow where he's a Hessian
I think that is
with
it.
pointy teeth?
No, I don't know where that came
He
from.
only says this.
He is a Hessian, and it was around the Revolutionary War that he's from, because there were Hessian soldiers, mercenary
brought in by the
soldiers.
British.
Yeah, in that area in New York. So
Yeah, when Washington crossed the Delaware, he killed a bunch of drunk Hessians.
and who wouldn't? So yeah,
Oh, he probably created a bunch of Headless Horsemen that day.
so many. There's just like a whole gang. Horseman Anonymous.
Kind of right around the D.C. area.
So that's really it on that one. It's just a short little story.
Well, I loved it. I had a great time with it. Does Christopher Walken play this one?
Just like in his own mind, or maybe. There are so many weird stories that we could tell about Connecticut. I mean, even further. I know we're skipping over a couple that we really want to deep dive into later.
Yes.
Like anything associated with the Warrens and, the White Lady of Easton. They're big into that story. The witch trials that we had here. But, yeah, I thought this was a really good overview of just how weird this place can get.
That's it. This is Connecticut. And this is a break. We'll be back with a segment in a minute.
Let's take a trip to the Bizarre Bazaar. CBS Denver reports on the strange story of a cursed rock. Apparently, the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department recently received an interesting piece of mail containing a rock and a short note, which read, "Someone brought this home to me 3 years ago. Bad things been happening ever since." According to the note, the rock had been taken from a park in Colorado. A Parks and Wildlife Department employee observed that, quote, "the rock is red and appears soft like a sedimentary sandstone, likely fountain formation like Red Rocks Amphitheater in West Denver. And they think it is likely that the rock was taken from Roxborough State Park." Why the sender felt that this rock in particular was to blame for their troubles is up to conjecture. But for their part, the Parks and Wildlife Department reminded the public that the best practice when visiting any park or wilderness is to take only photographs and leave only footprints, because you never know which pebble is going to be cursed.
I feel like it's the beginning of a horror movie that ends with, whoever found the rock and the note tying a similar note to the rock and putting it out in the wilderness somewhere.
Yeah, the Jumanji ending.
Yes, very much so.
Well, looky here. It's a special Me and My Boo / Prime and Punishment co-production.
Ooh.
Remember Tiger King?
Oh, yes, I think so.
Yes, in the heady early days of quarantine, when we were all still convinced that this would last a month tops, when stimulus checks were a-flowing and companies were a-furloughing, we were all engrossed by the story of the Tiger King and, quote, "that bitch Carol Baskin." The adorably named Coco 5 News reports from Oklahoma that the search for possible human remains at the Greater Wynwood Exotic Animal Park, aka Tiger King's Tiger Kingdom, has been called off. Our old friends, the ghost...
Sorry, I wasn't aware that it had been called on.
Oh, yes. The Ghost Adventures boys were in the park doing a paranormal investigation.
Zach Bagans?
Yes, the very same.
That human can of Red Bull?
Yes, and I'm not sure why, because I don't remember anything in the documentary about the zoo being haunted, but I digress.
There were cats that died there.
Well, they brought in cadaver dogs for some reason during this investigation, and those dogs alerted at a small unused alligator pond on the property. The zoo's new owner, Jeff Lowe, he of the Soul Patch and Sugar Baby, said he believes that there are human remains on the property that just haven't been found yet. Authorities took the dogs seriously, as they don't usually make mistakes, dug around, investigated the area for hours, but no corpse was found. However, Jeff Lowe still says he believes those dogs were onto something. As far as I can tell, Zach Bagans has uncharacteristically offered no comment on the matter, though at least the paranormal side of the investigation will be shown on a 2-hour special this Halloween on Travel Channel.
So they are airing it?
Yep. On Halloween. So far.
Okay.
On the Prime side of Prime and Punishment, we tell you something we recently watched on Amazon Prime and give a quick review. Why Prime? Because it rhymes. Recently, we binged season 4 of RuPaul's Drag Race on Prime, and let me tell you, it was an emotional experience for Sean.
Roller coaster.
So what did you think? How would you rate it out of 5 stars?
Out of 5 stars, am I grading it on a curve against other Drag Race seasons, or just as content?
Just as a viewing experience through the lens of Drag Race.
Yeah, okay, let's give this a strong 4.5 stars. I think RuPaul's Drag Race sits at about 4 for me, and this was a particularly strong season. Hateable queens, as well as some very, very
Wonderful
lovable.
queens.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it brought everything that I want RuPaul's Drag Race to bring.
I agree. 4.5 stars. That's it for this episode of Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Ain't It Scary. And please subscribe to the show and throw us a 5-star review on iTunes. We'll be forever grateful. See you next Tuesday.
Yep. This show was created by Sean McCabe and Carrie Ferrante. Music by Kyle Ryan.
This has been a production of Long Boy Media.